Cathedral of Toledo. The Cathedral of Santa María, also called the Primate Cathedral of Spain, is a Catholic temple of Gothic architecture in Toledo, considered by some to be the magnum opus of this style in Spain. Its construction began in 1226 under the reign of Ferdinand III the Saint, and the last Gothic contributions took place in the 15th century, when in 1493 the vaults at the foot of the central nave were closed. In the times of the Catholic monarchs, it is built with white stone from Olihuelas, in the municipality of Oliías del Rey. It is popularly known as Dives Toletana, with a sense of the rich Toledana, that it is the seat of the archdiocese of Toledo. History. Origins. For many years, unwritten popular tradition has been telling that there was in this same place, where the current cathedral is located, a first temple from the time of the first Bishop Eugenio. This temple was consecrated for the second time in the year 587, after having undergone some alterations, as attested by the inscription that appeared in the 16th century, that is preserved in the cloister, and says, "In the name of the Lord the Church of St. Mary was consecrated in Catholic, on the first day of the Ides of April, in the happily first year of the reign of our most glorious King Flavius Reccared, era 625, April 13th, 587. The city had been the bishop's seat of Visigothic Hispania. The numerous councils of Toledo testify to its important ecclesiastical past. Requerido's abjuration of Arianism had also had its place and time in it. The Muslim invasion did not immediately eliminate the Christian imprint, and the bishopric was moved and established in the Church of Santa María ad Alfazan. It is believed that the Visigothic bishop's building was transformed again to become the main mosque of the city of Toledo. Some researchers point out that the prayer room of the mosque corresponds to the body of the 5 naves of the current cathedral. The Seine, or courtyard, would coincide with a part of the current cloister, and the chapel of San Pedro, and the minaret with the bell tower. Among the current archaeological data, it is possible to observe some vestiges of Muslim construction. An Islamic column embedded inside the chapel of Santa Lucia. The marble shafts that adorn the exterior of the choir are a use of an old Muslim construction. The crisscrossing caliphal arches in the triforium of the main chapel and in that of the ambulatory coincide with the Muslim building tradition of Córdoba, although their structure is of Christian design. The Cathedral of Alfonso VI. The city of Toledo was conquered by Alfonso VI, King of Leon and Castile, in 1085. One of the points of the capitulations that made possible the surrender of the city, without bloodshed, was the promise of this king to preserve and respect the buildings of worship, customs, and religion of both Muslims and the large Christian Mozarabic population. Naturally, the great mosque was included in this commitment. Shortly afterwards, the king had to be absent for reasons of state, leaving his wife Constanza and the abbot of the monastery of Sahagun Bernard de Cederac, or Bernardo de Cluny, who had been elevated to the rank of Archbishop of Toledo, at the head of the city. These two characters, by mutual agreement and taking advantage of the king's absence, were the protagonists of an event that, according to Father Mariana in his General History of Spain, was about to provoke a rebellion and the ruin of the recently conquered city. The matter was that on October 25, 1087, the archbishop, in agreement with Queen Constance, sent armed people to take over the mosque enclosure by force. After this attack, they installed a provisional altar and placed a bell on the minaret, following the Christian custom to throw away the filth of the law of Muhammad. Father Mariana says that King Alfonso VI was so angry when he found out what had happened that neither the archbishop nor the queen were able to placate him, and that he pronounced a death sentence for almost all those involved. Legend has it that the Muslims were the real intermediaries to achieve peace, with the figure of the negotiator and al-Faqih Abu Walid, who brought the king a message of tolerance, in which it was said that they accepted the usurpation as legitimate. In memory and gratitude for this gesture, the cathedral chapter of the 15th century dedicated a tribute to him and commissioned his effigy to be placed on one of the pillars of the main chapel, thus perpetuating his memory. This fact is not documented, and many art historians see in the effigy a priest of Muslim appearance. As a result of that event, the Mosque of Toledo was consecrated and converted into a Christian cathedral, with hardly any changes in its structure. It is not known what the mosque looked like, but taking into account the vestiges preserved in other cities, Seville, Jaén, Granada, Malaga, and the Mosque of Córdoba itself, it can be assumed that it was a columnar building, with horseshoe arches on columns, perhaps used from other Roman and Visigothic constructions. It is possible that it was quite similar to the Church of El Salvador in Toledo, an old mosque. King Alfonso VI made important donations to the new Temple. 9. On December 18, 1086, the cathedral was placed under the invocation of Mary and was granted villas, villages, mills, and a third of the income of all the other churches in the city. The first surviving royal privilege reads in Latin at its beginning, Ego disponit Deo, ad Afonsus Esperi Imperator Condeco, sedi metropolitane silicet, Sancte Maria Urbis, toltane honorum integrum, ut decent abere pontificalum sedum, secundum quod preteritus fiat constitutum a sanctus patribus. I, by the disposition of God, Alfonso Emperor of Spain, give to the metropolitan chair of Santa Maria in the city of Toledo the entire honor, as it should have the pontifical chair, according to the fact that in former times it was ordained by the Holy Fathers. The necessary works were carried out to establish Roman Christian worship, including the change of orientation of the presbytery and main chapel. In 1088 Urban II recognized it as a primacy cathedral over the others of the kingdom. The mosque cathedral remained almost intact until the 13th century. In the year 1222, when a bull of Pope Honorius III authorized the construction of the new factory to begin, which began in 1224 or 1225, and whose official ceremony of laying the first stone took place in 1226, other sources say 1227. With the presence of King Ferdinand III the Saint, throughout the 13th century, cathedral revenues were increased when Alcalade Henares was integrated into its patrimony. The Cathedral of Archbishop Jimenez de Rada. Interior. The cathedral building as it is seen today is the work of the 13th century, the time of the Archbishop of Toledo Rodrigo Jimenez de Rada and King Ferdinand III the Saint. The official ceremony of laying the first stone was delayed with respect to the beginning of the works, waiting for the king to make an appearance. 1227. Jimenez de Rada had been elected Archbishop of Toledo in 1209, and from the beginning of his mandate, he defended before the Pope the primacy of the See of Toledo. In his mind was the construction of a great cathedral worthy of this city that he ruled. At that time, the mosque cathedral was quite old and ruinous. Some sections had even been demolished by his predecessor. The mosque cathedral had a large space, but it was low and lacked the slenderness of other temples of similar importance. Jimenez de Rada was the enthusiastic promoter of the new cathedral that would be built to the taste of the time, in Gothic style. He was so enthusiastic about the project and so involved in it, that it was said that he was the author-architect of the designs of the new cathedral, a statement totally out of place according to historians and architects. The archbishop spent a few years maintaining and reinforcing the old temple while waiting for his dream to be realized. The current cathedral building plan. The structure of the building has a great influence of the best French Gothic of the 13th century, although adapted to Spanish taste. It measures 120 m long by 59 m wide. It consists of 5 naves plus a transept and a double ambulatory. The 2 external naves present an anomaly in that they are somewhat wider than the other 2. The oldest part of the temple is the chevet, which maintains in its architecture the original triforiums that extended along the naves from where they were removed in one of the many reforms and devolutions that the cathedral underwent. Still in the Gothic period, these triforiums were replaced by large stained glass windows. Those that are preserved from the chevet are of Magyar influence. The lower one is composed of pointed arches, and the upper one has a ribbed vault. It is not known if these Magyar themes existed in the previous mosque and were copied as a souvenir or were added in one of the improvements and enrichment of the factory, as something original and in good taste. At the head is the ambulatory, which is double as it corresponds to a 5-nave floor. This double ambulatory is of grandiose proportions and is enriched by architectural elements and an original vaulting. Chevet of Le Mans Cathedral, where you can see the rectangles and triangles in the sections of the ambulatory. The sections of the ambulatory corresponding to the different chapels were solved with alternative plans of rectangles and triangles, which made each chapel of different sizes, with the rectangular ones larger and the triangular ones smaller. This way of distributing the chevet can be seen in the French cathedrals of Notre Dame in Paris, Bourges and Le Mans, the latter being the most similar, although all three are more slender as a whole than the Spanish 1.20. The various reforms that were made over time altered the arrangement of some of the chapels. In some cases, a single chapel was rebuilt in a space of 3. See Chapel of Santiago n²7 on the plan, and Chapel of San Ildefonso n²8 on the plan. The vaults of the naves are quadripartite, except in the transept and main chapel, where they are reinforced with terslets. The master builders and their patrons. For centuries it was totally certain that the first master architect of the Cathedral of Toledo was Petrus Petri, Pedro Perez. Such certainty was based on the only existing testimony about the authorship, testimony engraved on a tombstone, well in view where you can see this legend written in a not very cultured Latin. Petrus Petri died in 1291, master of the Church of Santa Maria de Toledo, whose fame spread for his good examples and customs, who built this temple and rests here, because he who made such an admirable building will not feel the wrath of God. However, the date of the start of construction did not fit with the age of Petrus Petri, who in those years must have been too young to be an architect. In the middle of the 20th century, the Bishop of Ciudad Real demonstrated the existence of a first teacher before Petrus Petri, called Maestro Martin, married to Maria Gomez, probably of French origin, sent for by Jimenez de Rada. One of the documents is dated 1227 and names a Master Martin of the work of Santa Maria Toledo. In another document where the list of rents received by the cathedral in 1234 is given, the name of Master Martin of the work appears again, who is also said to be a tenant of a house belonging to the cathedral. In deeds of later years appear the names of Martin, mason, and Juan Martin, master mason, who are believed to be relatives of his. The studies carried out so far indicate that the Master Martin would be the author of the chapels of the ambulatories, and that when he disappeared due to death or absence, the Master Petrus took over the weight of the direction of the works, who finished the ambulatories and built the triforiums in the Toledo style. At the end of the 13th century, the chevet and 2 sections of the naves on the south side were completed. At the end of the 14th century, the figure of the Master Rodrigo Alfonso is documented, who laid the first stone of the cloister in 1389, under the patronage of Archbishop Pedro Tenorio, who died 10 years later. This archbishop was in charge of many works of the cathedral, such as the Chapel of San Blas and the cloister, which is famous for the artistic richness of its frescoes of the Sienese school. The next master of whom we have news was Alvar Martinez, other times Gonzalez, who was a quantity surveyor of the quarries of Olihuelas in the municipality of Oliías del Rey. He is the author of the west facade, which began to be built in 1418. The reforms made in 1787 mean that this facade cannot be seen as it was really in its origin. He was also the author of the only tower of the cathedral, in the time of Archbishop Juan Martínez de Contreras, 1423 to 1434, whose coats of arms appear on the frieze that crowns the first body. The crowning of the tower was made by another great master, Hannekin of Brussels, who shaped the arms of the next Archbishop, Juan de Sarrazuela. With Hannekin came a group of illustrious masters, Egas Cuman, Enrique Egas, Juan Guaz, who worked on doorways, chapels, and sumptuary works, putting an end to their work on Gothic work. The vaults at the foot of the central nave were closed in 1493, under the direction of Juan Guaz and Enrique Egas, with the patronage and supervision of Cardinal Pedro González de Mendoza, great patrons of the 16th century. Works and artists. Cardinal Cisneros. During the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries, different works took place in the cathedral, in accordance with the new styles, architectural works, doors, chapels, altars, and sumptuary works of sculpture and painting. The best and most active patrons of Toledo lived during the 16th century. They are the archbishop governors, who in the absence of the kings take care of the city and its magnificence. In 1493, at the end of the 15th century, Cardinal Mendoza supervised the works of enclosing the last vaults of the cathedral and expressed in his will his desire to be buried in the presbytery. In the first decade of the 15th century, the tomb was built in the Renaissance style. Afterwards, Cardinal Cisneros occupied the square, Under his influence and patronage, important works were carried out. Perhaps the most important was the Mozarabic Chapel, carried out by masters of the stature of Juan Francis, grille of the Mozarabic Chapel, Enrique Egas, Juan de Borgona, paintings of the Mozarabic Chapel, and his master Pedro de Gumiel. Cisneros also ordered the construction of the main altarpiece, the work of Diego Capin de Holanda, and the upper cloister for the canonical community, plus the library. He was succeeded by William de Croy, a Flemish, who never lived in Toledo. Alfonso de Fonseca y Acevedo, who had been Archbishop of Santiago de Compostela, was the promoter of the Chapel of the New Kings, the work of the architect Covarrubias, with paintings by Maella, 18th century. With Archbishop Juan Tavera, the Toledo Renaissance is in its great splendor. Under his government, the choir of Alonso Barragit and Felipe Vigorny was built. The interior facades of the transept, the Chapel of San Juan or del Tesoro, and other doorways and ornaments. With Juan Martinez Silicio, the cathedral was adorned with the grille of the main chapel, the work of Francisco de Villalpando. Cardinal Gaspar de Quiroga was responsible for the architectural complex of the Chapel of the Tabernacle, reliquary, sacristy and courtyard and treasurer's house. The drawings and plans were by the master Nicolas de Vergara the Younger. To build this complex, the Hospital del Rey was destroyed, which was rebuilt in front of the city, and whose works were carried out by the great Cardinal Bernardo de Sandoval y Rojas and the architect Nicolas de Vergara, well into the 17th century. Exterior of the cathedral. Main facade and large doors. Elevation of the western facade. The western facade is located in front of the town hall square, where the Archbishop's Palace and the town hall itself are also located. From the square, from left to right, rises the bell tower, the gate of hell, the gate of forgiveness, the gate of the last judgment or of the scribes, and, closing the monumental facade, the so-called second tower that was never finished, being used as a chapel under the invocation of Corpus Christi. It was built by order of Cardinal Cisneros and became popularly known as the Mozarabic Chapel. In the 16th century, Enrique Egas added a Gothic lantern, and Jorge Manuel Theotocopuli, El Greco's son, crowned it with a dome of cloths, 1622 to 1631. The bell tower began to be built in 1425 by Alvar Martinez, who probably took advantage of the body of the minaret of the previous mosque to build a first body with a square floor plan. The master Hannekin finished the structure by adding a second octagonal body with pointed finials, inspired by buildings in Antwerp or Brussels. Door of Forgiveness. The Door of Forgiveness, located in the center, dates from the 15th century. Construction began under the direction of Alvar Martinez in 1418 and is within the standards of French porticos. The name of this gate is due to the fact that in a certain period of time indulgences were granted to penitents who entered through it. At present it is always closed except on great occasions, such as the inauguration by the new Archbishop of the Primate Cathedral. It has a large arch with 6 Gothic archivolts. The jambs and mullion depict the 12 apostles and Christ. In the tympanum, framed in a decoration with motifs of castles and lions, something characteristic of the 14th century, appears the Virgin imposing the chasuble on San Ildefonso. The devotion of the local saint, San Ildefonso, justifies that the portal of the trial that should occupy the central door is moved to the right. The gate of the scribes, or of the last judgment, right, is the oldest gate, and was probably displaced by the central gate. It represents the decis of Christ the Man of Sorrows, the Virgin and St. John, and at the bottom, the resurrection of the dead and the damned along with a representation of the sun and the moon. The gate of hell left is also known as the Gate of the Tower and of the Palms because it was formerly reserved for the Palm Sunday procession. It was completed in the 15th century, presenting a somewhat anomalous decoration of human faces with crowns on a background with plant motifs, in the form of an allusion to the blessed in paradise. The facade was renovated between 1775 and 1780 by the architect Eugenio Durango under the mandate of Cardinal Lorenzana. The sculptor was Mariano Salvatierra. The reform was carried out in the same style in which it was, that is, in the Gothic style. The works were necessary due to the degradation of the stone, since it was cold and porous. It is possible that the doors were advanced between buttresses instead of the current arrangement, but it is not known for sure. Clock door. Clock door. It is the oldest, from the beginning of the 14th century, and is located on the facade on the north side. It is also called the following of the fair because it gave access to the street where the fair was once held. De la Chapinaria, because it was the border to the street that bears that name, where the chapines were manufactured and sold. Of the pots, because in their decoration you can see some of these utensils. The tympanum is divided into 4 horizontal bands, in which scenes from the life of Christ are shown: the Annunciation, the Nativity, the Adoration of the Magi, the Slaughter of the Innocents, the Flight into Egypt, the Circumcision, Jesus among the doctors, the Presentation of Jesus in the Temple, Baptism, and the Wedding at Cana. In the upper part of the tympanum is depicted the transit of the Virgin. The mullion or mantle is decorated with the image of the Virgin and Child. On the jambs there are images of kings and saints, all the work of the sculptor Juan Alemán, who also worked on the facade of the lions. Above this facade, you can see the later work of Durango, in neoclassical style of the 18th century, as in the main facade. It is a work of consolidation due to the poor condition in which the stone was found. The central intercolumnium is occupied by the clock face that gives its name to this door. The figurines of the carillon are by Diego Coppin. See the door, and its surroundings form a space with a small compass closed by a Gothic grille, the work of Juan Francis, with very simple bars, a small frieze separating the center, carved, and a very simple and harmonious cresting. In a remote place of the Puerta del Reloj, on the intradas of the arch of the door, there is a scene carved in relief, which, according to the researcher Teresa Perez Higuera, could represent an ancient legend from Toledo about the loves of Charlemagne and Princess Galiana. This legend serves as the plot for a French poem from the 12th century, entitled Minette, which, according to Ramon Menendez Pidal, was written in Toledo by the minstrel of Minette, probably one of the many Franks living in the city. The carving shows 2 horsemen fighting in the open field, surrounded to the left and right by a beloved knight and an embracing couple, and it would represent the moment in which Minette, Charlemagne's hidden name, fights against the Moor Bramet, who has besieged Toledo because he wants to marry Galiana, which she and her father, King Galafra, oppose. Minette is serving the Muslim king, removed from the court due to disagreements with his father, King Pepin of France. In the combat, Minette manages to snatch the Durand Art sword from Bramet, whom he pursues until he kills him in a place between Oliías and Cabanas. On his return to France and crowned king, he married Galiana, who had previously been baptized. The legend ended up becoming an epic poem with new versions in France, and it is not surprising that it is included in the iconographic program of the Puerta del Reloj, built by French stonemasons at the end of the 13th century. Inside the door of the clock, you can see various medallions, the best of those of the Virgin of the Annunciation by Nicolas de Vergara el Mozo and the Archangel San Gabriel by Juan Bautista Vasquez. It is also adorned with paintings and coats of arms. The interior hinges of the door are from the 18th century, the work of Raimundo Chapuz, while the exterior hinges, in bronze, are the work of 2 sculptors, Zorino, the one on the left, and Antonio Dominguez, the one on the right. Above the facade is the 13th century rose window, in which the oldest stained glass windows of the cathedral are preserved, dating from the 14th century. The rest of the stained glass windows are, for the most part, from the 15th and 16th centuries, although many were destroyed by the bombings of the Civil War. Lion's Gate, from the 15th and 16th centuries. It is the most modern of the large doors. It is named after the lions that crown the columns of the grille that closes the small compass. It also has 2 other names, 43. Puerta Nueva, as it was the last one to be built. Puerta de la Alegría, an allusion to the celebration of the Assumption of the Virgin that is represented on the back head, behind the archivolts. It was built between 1460 to 1466, under the mandate of Archbishop Alonso Carrillo de Acuña, with traces of Hannekin de Bruxelles and A. Gascuman in collaboration with the Flemish sculptors Pedro and Juan Guaz and Juan Alemán, author of the Apostolate. These artists were at the head of a large workshop that had prestigious stonemasons and carvers. The statuary of the door is one of the best Hispano-Flemish ensembles of the 15th century, especially the Virgin of the Mullion and the statues of the Jambs Point 40, for the cherubs and musician angels that accompany the ascent of Merito heaven are works of art executed with great delicacy. The facade was altered by Durango and Salvatierra in the 18th century, as well as the other doors, to consolidate the building. The 11 medallions above the last archivolt represent prophets and patriarchs. The one in the center represents the Virgin Mary. The door is topped by a large statue of St. Augustine praying. The bronze hinges of the doors are a masterpiece by Francisco de Villalpando, who did a great job on the 35 boards or plates. They are hidden from view, protected with wooden panels. Above it can be seen the large rose window with polychrome stained glass windows. Interior of the Lion's Gate. Assumption of the Virgin, detail of the Lion's Gate. The interior of the door corresponds to the large facade of the transept on its southern side, on which rests the small balcony, with the Renaissance balustrade that supports the tribune where the emperor's organ is located, the oldest in the cathedral, from the mid-16th century, with the box executed in stone. It is traditional for this organ to sound on the feast of Corpus Christi on the return of the procession. It is also used on other solemn occasions or in concerts. Higher up is the large rose window, framed in a square whose spandrels are carved with roses. In the lower part of the great facade is the door divided by mullions. Above the door is the tympanum sculpted with themes from the genealogy of the Virgin Jessie tree, whose authors were the same ones who worked on the exterior of this door. Above the tympanum you can see the plateresque work in the center of which there is a large medallion of the coronation of the Virgin, the work of Gregorio Pardo, eldest son of Felipe Vigoni. On both sides are the statues of David and Solomon, attributed to Stephen Jamit. To the right and left of this facade, below, are two tombs. The one on the right was empty until 1993, when the ashes of Archbishop Fray Bartolomé de Carranza were transferred from Rome, at the express wish of Cardinal Marcelo González Martín. The one on the left holds the remains of Canon Alfonso de Rojas, represented in a praying statue. The outer grille of the Lion's Gate. Detail of the exterior grille of the Door of the Lions, by Juan Álvarez de Molina. This work was executed a century after the great grilles of the main chapel and the choir, in a completely different style from the former, which gave way to solidity and usefulness, rather than to the taste for ornamentation shown in the previous century. Its author was Juan Álvarez de Molina, a native of Ubeda Jaén, who made the grille in the city of Toledo in 1647. The documents preserved in this regard say that the grille received 8,504 reals and 12 maravedis, in addition to the 27,000 that had been given to him previously. The document gives an account of the cost of the iron used by the wrangler, which amounted to practically the amount received for the work. Other doors and doorways of the cathedral. Puerta Lana, cover of Santa Catalina. It is one of the two doors that open to the cloister. Late Gothic style. Its archivolts are carved with plant motifs of leaf litter and foliage. The pillar that serves as a mainel is very elaborate on its side faces, with castles and lions. Inside it has two sections. The highest is ornamented with a series of statues with canopies. In the tympanum above the Gothic arch, there is a painting by Luis de Velasco representing the Annunciation. Presentation Gate. It is the other door that leads to the cloister, from the times of Cardinal Tavera, of rich carving and miniatures of imagery in plateresque style, made of good, very white stone. The medallion is the work of Pedro Martínez Castañeda, 1568, and represents the presentation of Our Lady. Tower. Upper body. The tower was designed and started by Alvar Martínez. The construction began in 1425, immediately after Álvar Martínez finished the cloister. Alvar Martínez's work reached the culmination of the fourth body. It is Gothic, with some muddy jar influence. Behind a high square base, inside which the treasure chapel is housed, 4 bodies are superimposed, and above it a 5th body of lower height. In the second body the bell ringer had his dwelling, and the third served as an ecclesiastical prison. Between the first and second bodies, there is a black marble frieze, where the coats of arms of Archbishop Juan Martínez de Contreras, 1422 to 1438, are highlighted in white marble. The total height reaches 92 m. Alvar Martinez left no traces or drawings to continue the coronation. The top of the tower with the octagonal body was the work of the architect Hannequin from Brussels, who came to work on this cathedral together with a group of great figures, Egas Cuman, Enrique Egas, and Juan Guaz among others. The octagonal body is accompanied by pinnacles and flying buttresses, and is topped with an arrow that supports 3 crowns imitating a tiara. Originally, the project was to build 2 towers. Citation needed, one on each side of the western facade, but only one was raised, the one in the northwest corner, while only the first sections of the opposite were raised, this being the place where the Mozarabic chapel would later be built. According to Pedro Navascues, it is not clear if it was really a tower that was wanted to be built here, or it was just the enclosure of a funerary chapel or a chapter house. The Bell of St. Eugene. On December 8, 1755, the inaugural tolling of the Bell of San Eugenio, popularly known as the Fat Bell, sounded. Its first effective sound already showed signs of incipient breakage, the result of a casting defect that would end up cracking it until it looked as it does today. The people of Toledo had waited for 2 years to see the largest bell in Spain melted down, which with its almost 18 tons was only surpassed in the world by the great Moscow bell of the Tsar and that of the Cathedral of Cologne. The promoter of this campaign was Luis Antonio de Bourbon, the Archbishop Cardinal of Toledo, son of Philip V, who invested an enormous amount of money in this project. But neither this expense nor the solemn liturgical acts held to pray for the success of its casting in a workshop near the Plaza de San Justo prevented the bell from being a failure. Despite the initial forceful diagnosis of the cathedral surveyor, attributing its bad sound and the crack in the bell to a casting defect, local honor, contemporary historiography, and popular legends conspired to blame its breakage on the enormous size of its bronze clapper, which was immediately replaced by a smaller one, without this preventing its crack from enlarging. All the responsibility lay with the renowned Cantabrian bell ringer Alejandro Gargalo, architect of La Guarda, who had already cast other defective bells previously, and was even unable to comply with the clause of the contract that obliged him to move and raise the bell to the tower, a task that was very costly and complicated. Chapels. Main article. Chapels of the Cathedral of Toledo. The main and minor chapels conceived in Rodrigo Jimenez de Roda's project originally surrounded the cathedral's chancel. Of these, some disappeared and others were expanded or rearranged. Of the smaller ones, only the chapels of Santa Ana and San Gil remain. Of the largest, those of San Juan Bautista and Santa Leocadia de Toledo are preserved with elements from the first period. Only the chapel of Reyes Viejos and that of Santa Lucia remain altered only in their ornamentation. The rest were modified or disappeared, although in some of them the mouth can be recognized. 6 small chapels of the ambulatory gave way in the 14th and 15th centuries to the funerary chapels of San Ildefonso and Santiago. That of the Christ of the Column, also called of San Bartolome, was transformed at the beginning of the 17th century to give way to that of the Christ of the Students, or Christ of the Covers. After the different modifications are the aforementioned chapel of the Old Kings, San Juan Bautista, Santa Leocadia, and Santa Lucia, as well as the chapel of San Eugenio, the chapel of San Blas, incorporated into the cloister the chapel of San Pedro, and the chapel of the New Kings. In the successive remodeling and works, the criterion of advancing from the head of the cathedral towards the wall was almost always followed, and this explains well the current, sometimes chaotic, layout with respect to the first designs. The first name of the chapel of the Old Kings is unknown. The current one has its origin in 1498 when Cardinal Cisneros wanted to move the royal burials from the main chapel, which was finally not done. In the 13th century, it served as a funeral home to house the mortal remains of Archbishop Gonzalo Diaz Palamic. The chapel of Santa Lucia is one of the few spaces where you can see remains of the old mosque, specifically a column and its capital. The chapel of San Eugenio, also called San Pedro el Viejo or Corpus Christi, is located on the south side and maintains all the architectural style of the 13th century, unlike the rest. The one of San Pedro, located on the north wall and next to the east side of the cloister, is the largest and serves as a parish chapel. It has a heptagonal chevet, with 2 lines with vaults of tercelites, and its purpose, when it was built at the beginning of the 15th century, was to serve as a funerary chapel for Archbishop Sancho de Rojas. Main chapel. Entrance to the main chapel. The main chapel accumulates a great wealth of works of art, starting with the architecture of the enclosure itself. Originally, it was separated into 2 parts, with 2 independent vaults. The polygonal vault belonged to the chapel of the Old Kings, which was somewhat separated. With this division, the chancel was somewhat narrow and not very suitable for such a cathedral. Cardinal Cisneros was very clear about rebuilding this part of the cathedral, and after some situations of confrontation with the chapter, he obtained consent to demolish the chapel of the Old Kings, make the presbytery wider, and give enough space for the great Gothic altarpiece that he himself had commissioned. Also originally, the chapel was closed on the side by 2 stone grills, which were like huge gates. The part corresponding to the Gospel was destroyed when the mausoleum of Cardinal Mendoza was built. The part corresponding to the epistle remains, and from it can be deduced that it was a great work. Some art critics claim that this stone grill is one of the most beautiful parts of the cathedral. It is possible that it was completed in the time of Archbishop Pedro de Luna, whose arms and polychrome coats of arms of Castile and Leon appear in this work. It is copiously decorated with statuary and topped by a choir of angels that seem to be flying. In harmony with this work of openwork stone, the 2 pillars that lead to the interior of the chapel were built. On the pillar on the left you can see the statue of the famous shepherd of Las Navas. The opposite pillar is called the Alfaqui after the statue of this character Abu Walid, who brought a message of tolerance to King Alfonso VI. See the section The Cathedral of Alfonso VI. The entire presbytery is carved and chiseled with figures of all sizes and mythological figures. In the polygonal part on the Gospel side are the well-decorated tombs with recumbent statues of Alfonso VII of Leon and Pedro de Aguilar, illegitimate son of Alfonso XI the Just. On the epistle side are the burials of Sancho IV of Leon and Castile, and of King Sancho III of Castile. The images of the kings are executed in wood carved by Coppen de Hollanda and polychrome by Francisco de Amberes. It closes